Making movies isn't easy. If you're Steven Spielberg, Ridley Scott, or Martin Scorsese, you might be able to make it a long-lasting, fulfilling career. You pick your own projects, some of them work, some of them don't. But not everyone is as lucky. Least lucky, at least in terms of unfulfilled ambitions, are the one-hit wonder directors. These directors fall broadly into one of two categories. The first are directors who only ever directed one feature film. Maybe they have some shorts, maybe they have some TV credits, but they directed just one theatrical film and no more for whatever reason. The second are directors that are known for one excellent work and then everything before or after that is a blur. They had a breakout hit, but for whatever reason were unable to capitalize on it. In this video, I want to take a look at both categories and see what happened that led to them not getting another success. I have an abiding admiration for Tim Miller, who directed the first Deadpool movie, kickstarting, along with Ryan Reynolds, the funnest superhero franchise, a fun that's been kept up in the recent Deadpool vs. Wolverine. Unfortunately, Miller's movie right after Deadpool ended up being 2019's Terminator Dark Fate, one of the biggest bombs in movie history. Ryan Reynolds is most closely associated with Deadpool for a good reason. Without him sticking with the project for the better part of a decade, it's unlikely it ever would have been made. But lest we forget, Deadpool was in development hell for a long time. When Reynolds did Green Lantern, there was a good chance that Deadpool might never happen. Though I personally enjoyed it, Lantern was a massive critical and commercial flop when every other superhero movie was taking off. Hell, The Avengers was just a year away from release at that time. The thing that saved Deadpool, in addition to Reynolds' resilience, was Tim Miller. Miller had come up on the VFX and technical side of filmmaking, earning respect and admiration from James Cameron and David Fincher, who also obsessed over the technical aspect of it all. Reynolds and Miller were able to convince 20th Century Fox, who owned the rights to Deadpool, the X-Men, and others at the time, to let the team make some test footage for Deadpool in 2011 as a way to save the project. While that plan didn't work out at the time, someone had the good sense to leak the test footage. The fan reception was quick and intense. Everyone wanted a Deadpool movie. Fox, to their credit, heard the outpour and gave the team a $58 million budget. Peanuts compared to the Avengers' $220 million budget, but it was more than enough. The team crafted a $783 million masterwork. But as they started working on Deadpool 2, it was clear that things were not going to work out. According to Tim Miller, quote, "It became clear that Ryan wanted to be in control of the franchise. You can work that way as a director quite successfully, but I can't. I don't mind having a debate, but if I can't win, I don't want to play," end quote. And because Reynolds was the star and the one most closely associated with Deadpool, the studio was going to back him no matter what. Miller would walk away from the project and on to another one, Terminator Dark Fate, and that's when it really hit the fan. To be fair, while people complain about the three movies before it, 2003's Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, starring Arnold and directed by Jonathan Mostow, 2009's Terminator Salvation, starring Christian Bale and directed by McG, and 2015's Terminator Genisys, again starring Arnold and directed by Alan Taylor. Each of the movies made money, while Rise of the Machines even got decent reviews. There was reason to think that this one would do even better than the others. After all, it was the first Terminator movie since 1991's Terminator 2 Judgment Day that James Cameron, the man who started it all, would be on board as a producer and story writer. Arnold was on board as well. However, it failed to stick the landing. The movie bombed at the box office, losing an estimated $123 million and getting average reviews. Joe Morgenstern at the Wall Street Journal was especially harsh, saying that it was, quote, "cobbled together by dunces in a last-ditch effort to wring revenue from a moribund concept," end quote. But more telling is what Tim Miller, James Cameron, and Arnold Schwarzenegger thought. Miller agreed with Morgenstern, saying that people, quote, "hate it because it's the sixth movie and Hollywood should be making original movies and not repeating franchises," end quote. He was even more harsh in 2022, saying he thought he could make a good Terminator movie, but that he was wrong. James Cameron said he was satisfied with the movie, but said one of his issues was that if Arnold Schwarzenegger wasn't involved, he would not want to be a part of it. This was over Miller's objections, who wanted to take the movie in a different direction. Then you had two geriatric stars, with Cameron saying, quote, "It wasn't your Terminator movie, it wasn't even your dad's Terminator movie, it was your granddad's Terminator movie," end quote. Schwarzenegger, meanwhile, said that he was done with the franchise, saying it was time for someone to come up with a great idea. His issue with Genisys and Dark Fate were similar, quote, "They were just not well written," end quote. Since the movie bombed, Miller has executive produced other projects like the Sonic the Hedgehog movies and directed some reshoots of the Borderlands movie, but he hasn't directed a solo project since. It feels weird putting Marlon Brando on this list. I mean, come on, the guy was Vito Corleone, the Godfather. He's been the lead of some of the best films ever made: Apocalypse Now, A Streetcar Named Desire, On the Waterfront, and more. But what some people might not realize is that Brando also directed one movie, 1961's One-Eyed Jacks. One-Eyed Jacks is a western that sees Brando playing Rio, a bank robber that goes to jail for bank robbing and then, as soon as he gets out, plans to do another bank robbery, but with the added bonus of getting revenge on his partner who betrayed him. He ends up falling for his partner's stepdaughter though, and things go awry, much like what happened with the movie, which also explains why Brando never directed again. He wasn't supposed to direct, you see. The movie is based on the authentic death of Henry Jones and was being produced by Frank Rosenberg. Stanley Kubrick was brought on to direct. At this point, Kubrick had already made Paths of Glory and would soon begin work on Spartacus. This would have been his first Western. Brando, being Brando, was happy to throw his weight around though. He churned through half a dozen writers before landing on Guy Trosper. Then he clashed with Kubrick. According to Kubrick, quote, "We never got anything straight. At the end of 2 years, Marlon decided to get decisive suddenly," end quote. Brando was an eclectic person. He assembled the creative team and set a stopwatch to 3 minutes. Everyone had 3 minutes to air their grievances about the movie, after which he would cut them off. Kubrick had the same ultimatum. He began rattling off issues, but Brando cut him off when he was on page 5 of the screenplay. Kubrick later said that he suspected that it was all a ploy by Brando to annoy him into leaving the project so that he could direct it, which makes sense because as soon as Kubrick left, Brando took over as director. Interestingly, he was quite Kubrickian. The shoot was a whopping 9 months. Brando kept the cast and crew for long hours to get the right shots and had them do take after take after take after take. The budget swelled from $3 million to $6 million. All of it was for naught. At the time of release, One-Eyed Jacks got mixed reviews and failed to recoup its budget at the box office. Though it's gone up in esteem in the intervening years, Brando's first outing as a director would also be his last. At the end of the affair, Brando said, quote, "Paramount said it didn't like my version of the story. I'd had everyone lie except Carl Malden. The studio cut the movie to pieces and made him a liar too. By then, I was bored with the whole project and walked away from it," end quote. By this point, Brando was growing dissatisfied with the film industry and started to view acting as more of a financial end than anything else. The 60s would see something of a decline in his star, though, of course, he would later be able to recapture that shine. Everyone has, at least once, probably seen someone with love-hate written on their knuckles, in pen, Sharpie, or an actual tattoo. In Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, Radio Raheem famously had a love-hate set of brass knuckles. Lee, a movie lover, got the idea from one of the finest films ever made, 1955's The Night of the Hunter. The Night of the Hunter tells the story of a serial killer preacher, Harry Powell, who plans to murder a widow and her children in order to steal $10,000 that their father had robbed. The preacher is played by Robert Mitchum and is considered one of the greatest movie villains ever. Mitchum, one of the greatest actors of all time, 2-time Academy Award winner Shelley Winters, and legendary silent film actress Lillian Gish, were all directed by Charles Laughton in what would be the only movie he ever directed. Laughton is an interesting case. He came up on the acting side, first on the stage and then in Hollywood. One of his most notable film roles came early on in 1933's The Private Life of Henry VIII, for which he won an Academy Award for Best Actor. He would get more nominations for movies like 1935's Mutiny on the Bounty and 1957's Witness for the Prosecution, and would work with directors like Stanley Kubrick in 1960's Spartacus and Alfred Hitchcock's Jamaica Inn in 1939. Daniel Day-Lewis, one of the finest actors of our time, said this of Laughton, quote, "He was probably the greatest film actor who came from that period of time," end quote. The Night of the Hunter would be Laughton's only film. John Carradine and Laurence Olivier, both excellent actors, expressed interest in the preacher role, but the timing didn't work out. So Laughton went with Robert Mitchum. The film was, by all accounts, a joy to work on. Laughton was, understandably, nervous as this was his first directed feature, but as an actor, he also had a sense of what the other actors would want to bring to their roles. He was extremely collaborative and supportive of the actors, and those that worked with him hailed it as one of their favorite experiences. Mitchum would go so far as to say that Laughton was the best director he worked with, and that The Night of the Hunter was his favorite movie that he acted in. It's not hard to understand why when you see the film through the lens of today. Laughton's masterful direction of already excellent actors, coupled with the stylized cinematography of Stanley Cortez, the excellent writing of James Agee, and the music of Walter Schumann came together to concoct a masterpiece. It also has one of the most haunting shots of any film, a woman in a car at the bottom of a lake. But people at the time did not appreciate it. It began with the United Artists executive who told the film's editor, Robert Golden, that, quote, "it's too arty," end quote. That sentiment was echoed in Harrison's Reports, a now-defunct weekly magazine. Quote, "The picture might have some appeal for those who patronize art houses in search of the unusual in movie fare, but the great majority of those who see it will look upon it as a choppily edited, foggy melodrama peopled with foggy characters," end quote. Or, as Life magazine put it, it, quote, "strains too hard at being simple and winds up being pretentious," end quote, though they still held it as, quote, "one of the year's most interesting and provocative films," end quote. The movie was censored in some parts of the US because of how it portrayed a preacher, and overall, it was a critical and commercial failure in 1955. Laughton seemed to take it to heart and never directed another movie again. But the movie has a happy coda. Starting as a cult hit, it grew and grew in popularity. Roger Ebert would say that, quote, "it is one of the most frightening of movies, with one of the most unforgettable of villains, and on both of those scores, it holds up as well after 4 decades," end quote, with others describing it as dark, deep, and beautiful. Almost 70 years after its release, the movie is still considered a masterpiece. Josh Trank is a cautionary tale either of excess or ego. Here's a relatively young guy that exploded onto the indie film scene when he was just 28, with 2012's Chronicle, starring Dane DeHaan, Alex Russell, and Michael B. Jordan. Coming at a time when the superhero movie was on a vigorous upswing, Chronicle offered a vision of what unchecked power can do to a person. The movie was a stunning critical and commercial success, raking in $127 million on a $15 million budget. Roger Ebert said that it, quote, "grows into an uncommonly entertaining movie that involves elements of a superhero origin story, a science fiction fantasy, and a drama about a disturbed teenager," end quote. 20th Century Fox, which produced and distributed the film, then decided to take a bigger risk on Josh Trank. They gave him the reins to 2015's Fantastic Four. Then the wheels came off. Trank was entrusted with a $120 million budget that then blew past $150 million. 30 at the time, you would think that this great power would beget great responsibility. Not true in Trank's case. The Fantastic Four production was a mess. Some of it can be chalked up to youth. The guy was on the cusp of his 30s and was entrusted with a massive budget. Sure, some people rise to the challenge of a massive production. Stanley Kubrick had no issue commanding thousands of extras for Spartacus, while Orson Welles was more than happy to go up against billionaire William Randolph Hearst for Citizen Kane. But Trank was unable to rise to this particular challenge. Near the release of the film, a Fox spokesperson acknowledged, quote, "there were definitely some bumps in the road," end quote. The bumps included more than $100,000 in damage to a rented property, telling actors when to blink and breathe, and sometimes retreating to a black tent he had constructed around some monitors. Fox had apparently had misgivings about Trank all the way back during pre-production, but for some reason they didn't act on them. It came to bite them later. Fox would eventually wrest the project from Trank, editing it as they pleased. That, at least, set Trank off. He fired off a tweet that read, quote, "a year ago I had a fantastic vision of this, and it would have received great reviews. You'll probably never see it. That's reality though," end quote. While the relationship with Fox was dead at this point, that likely did not help. While it's likely we'll never know the true story of what happened, one thing is clear. At a certain point, Trank was removed as a director in all but name and would go on to disavow the film entirely, saying that his version is not the version that we see. And whether or not reports of his erratic behavior were true or not, it led to lost opportunities. He was supposed to direct a standalone Boba Fett movie, but after the reports about the disastrous production of Fantastic Four, he was fired from that role by Disney. His most recent movie was 2020's Capone, a movie about Al Capone, whose release unfortunately coincided with the height of the pandemic. It wasn't able to perform at the box office and did not perform well with critics either. He's still young, so a comeback might be in the works, perhaps with the Theodore Roosevelt film he has in production. But it's nothing short of unfortunate that such a bright star was laid low so quickly, seemingly by their own devices. Tony Kaye, director of American History X, had one of the most spectacular self-implosions in directing history. His debut film was American History X, which starred Edward Norton, and based on reviews, you would think that he would have an easy time finding another job. I mean, people liked the movie, and even though it didn't do numbers at the box office, it was at a time when movies could make up for it with TV syndication and home video sales. Kaye, who was easy to work with during production, should have had a smooth ride. Easy to work with during production, that is. The thing is, after the production ended, everything went downhill fast. Amazingly, Kaye was able to deliver his movie on time and on budget, which is something of a rarity in Hollywood. And when New Line Cinema did test screenings, those also went well considering the subject matter. Now, the issue was Edward Norton. Norton had a reputation for being difficult to work with, and while things were alright on set, he asserted himself after the movie was finished, threatening to not do any press for it unless he got final cut. Kaye, through gritted teeth, agreed. Things turned violent very soon though. According to an LA Times article, quote, "One day Kaye stormed out of the editing room and punched a nearby wall, cutting his hand to the bone. My hand must have hit a hidden nail because I had blood gushing everywhere," he recalls. "I had to go to the hospital to have stitches. I still have the scar," end quote. Supposedly, the Kaye cut and the Norton cut were mostly similar, despite Norton adding 18 more minutes to the movie. Mitch Goldman, who ran marketing for New Line, said that he couldn't tell the difference and told Kaye that, quote, "The current version is every bit as emotionally powerful," end quote. Test audiences liked the new version as well, but it was the principle of the matter that concerned Kaye, and he let it be known. New Line Cinema chairman Bob Shaye and president Mike DeLuca tried to convince Kaye to go with the new cut. Kaye went nuclear. It's actually kind of glorious. First, he threatened to take his name off the film. When he extorted some concessions, 8 weeks to recut the movie, he decided to destroy any chance of a friendly solution. First, he spent 6 figures taking out attack ads in Hollywood newspapers that had random quotes blasting New Line. Then, during those 8 weeks, as opposed to doing something to help the film, he, quote, "spent several weeks working on new scenes and voiceover dialogue with Nobel Prize-winning poet Derek Walcott," end quote. Then, when he was supposed to show them the new cut, Kaye, quote, "showed up with a rabbi, a priest, and a Tibetan monk," end quote. Why? Who the hell knows? New Line put their foot down and said that they were going to show Norton's cut at the Toronto International Film Festival. So, Kaye sabotaged it. He filmed himself demanding the organizers reject the movie. Instead, New Line pulled it. He tried to get his name removed from the movie to be replaced with a pseudonym. His choice, Humpty Dumpty. In Kaye's words, quote, "I like the sound of it, directed by Humpty Dumpty. In fact, I'm going to hire someone to wear a Humpty Dumpty outfit, walk around New Line's plaza, and sit on their little wall and occasionally fall off," end quote. He would eventually sue New Line for $200 million, but the case was dismissed and Kaye got himself blackballed from the industry. Kaye had the chance everybody dreams of, but sabotaged it by his own hand. He even admitted it, saying, quote, "I was overcome and I was egotistical back then. My ego got in the way. Whenever I can, I take the opportunity to apologize to all the people I aggravated. I was doing my best, it was my passion, but I was still completely in the wrong," end quote. Since American History Act, he did a documentary film, Lake of Fire, an unreleased film, Blackwater Transit, and Detachment in 2011, which failed at the box office and with critics. He has some films in production right now, but how they do is anybody's guess. The story of Richard Kelly is depressing for its banality. There's no nuclear meltdown, there are no creative clashes, there's no drama behind the scenes, there's no significant body of work that leads to a lambasted feature that picks up traction in later years. No, it's just good old bad business, and it couldn't have happened to a more creative person. Richard Kelly's creativity is on full display in 2001's Donnie Darko, starring Jake Gyllenhaal and directed by the 26-year-old Kelly. The movie had the hallmarks that would haunt Kelly in future films. It was esoteric, complicated, and difficult to pitch. And because Kelly wanted to direct it, it made things even harder. Eventually, Kelly interested some agents at CAA who decided to take it on. The film got solid reviews when it came out and would eventually turn a profit at the box office, though it did take some time. Empire magazine would hail it as the second best indie movie of all time after Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs. His next project was a script for Domino for Tony Scott. It wouldn't be until 2006 that he released his next feature, Southland Tales. Alas, critical and commercial reception was frosty. Made on the $17 million budget, the movie made less than $400,000 at the box office, though it has picked up a following in the intervening years. 2009's The Box also suffered a commercial and critical failure, and Kelly hasn't directed another film since, though he says he's working on some projects. In a 2023 interview Kelly did, you get a sense of the frustration that he's feeling right now. In it, he said, quote, "There's been just lots of roadblocks and lots of hurdles, speed bumps, all sorts of barriers to the green light," end quote. Unfortunately for Kelly, it's a nuts and bolts kind of thing. Though he makes interesting and surreal movies that eventually find an audience, they run into issues at the box office on immediate release. It's been 15 years since his last film, which might as well be forever in Hollywood. Kelly also says that he's been, quote, "very careful and very deliberate with all the stuff I've been working on just to make sure that I'm operating in my own wheelhouse," end quote. But there's something to be said for just doing something. Waiting for perfection will keep you waiting forever. It seems as though he has stuff in the pipeline, but sooner or later, he's going to have to just get it out there. Here's hoping that he does. Making movies is hard enough that it's no surprise that some people only make one really good movie or just one movie. Sometimes you get a guy like George Lucas who has a 20-year gap between movies. It seems like they'll never direct again, but they might surprise you. While Marlon Brando and Charles Laughton won't ever direct again, all of the other directors still have some spark in them, as well as projects in the works. Tim Miller, Richard Kelly, Josh Trank, and Tony Kaye might be down, but it would be wrong to say that they're completely out. All of them have proven themselves to be competent, if not excellent, filmmakers, and I think all of them still have something left to give. But perhaps that's just optimism on my behalf. Still, better to be optimistic than not.